Welcome back to another lesson with A Gen, where we get the best grades, no break or bend. Past failures, we make amends, always upgrading our levels, setting the trends. We're going to be learning today about Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde, so we're going to be going over a brief overview over the key quotes and analysis. Oh, whoa, I got myself mistaken. This is not a brief overview. We are going into in-depth analysis from most of the quotes that I've put in this slide here. So yeah, this pretty much everything you need to ever revise Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde. And what you have to do as well for Romeo and Juliet and also an Inspector Calls. But I'm gonna also make videos the same as I did here, key quotes analysis. I'm gonna do for Romeo and Juliet and an Inspector Calls. Sorry. Okay, so let me just get started. Just so in case you don't know, Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde is in Literature Paper 1 and it's a section B. So yeah. So we're gonna go over the characters, which you can see here: Dr. Jekyll, Mr. Hyde, Mr. Utterson, Dr. Lanyon, and the themes, which is horror and fear, violence and crime, science versus religion, and we're gonna go over some context. So let's get started. So our first character is Dr. Jekyll. The first quote is like some disconsolate prisoner. Like is a simile. Dr. Jekyll is compared to a disconsolate prisoner, which represents him very unhappy and unable to be comforted. It also portrays how Jekyll can't control Hyde. Hyde, his evil side, has now taken over all dunamis in regards to Jekyll. Jekyll is regarded as a slave to evil, Hyde, and is in bondage to sin. Given that Hyde evil is presented as corrupting, the nefarious nature excludes him from the highly religious Victorian society. He began to go wrong in the mind. Lanyon says this about Jekyll, Dr. Lanyon's narrative, sorry. With this knowledge in mind, we begin to comprehend the sinister influences Jekyll's concoction has on him. As Jekyll admits in the final chapter, the potion was neither diabolical nor divine. It did not discriminate to one side of a moral spectrum. Jekyll's suppressed evil side hence begins to express itself with the help of the potion, which acted as a catalyst for Jekyll's downfall into evil. The adjective wrong and its repetition emphasizes how robustly Lanyon rejects the emerging field of supernatural science. However, the phrase wrong in mind seems to go further by implying Jekyll's beliefs are an indication of mental instability, an insinuation that would be extremely damaging to a man's respectability and reputation. This idea is reinforced when Lanyon once again uses the language of illness by claiming a cerebral disease is the root cause of Jekyll's behavior. The large, handsome face of Dr. Jekyll grew pale to the lips, and there came a blackness about his eyes. In chapter 3, Robert Louis Stevenson is showing the reader the inner evil that is within Dr. Jekyll, that dark side being Mr. Hyde. He gives the reader the sense of evil that is hiding within the Doctor. The quote is representing Dr. Jekyll's struggles to not fall into the grasp of his evil side, Mr. Hyde. Jekyll is having a lot of trouble doing so and is not proud of his other side, Mr. Hyde. The blackness in his eyes may be a symbol of guilt or shame in addition to the inner evil, whereas the sense in this chapter that Dr. Jekyll is continually battling with his duality. Upon Utterson's mention of Hyde, Jekyll undergoes a radical transformation, where his previously handsome face turns corrupted and demonic. The reader may attribute this to his fear of Hyde, as they agree with Utterson's conjecture about the blackmail though the suspicion is aroused when Jekyll chooses to hide his plight from his closest friend. The dark statement brings about a change in tone and pace from the convivial party, and further intrigues the reader by suggesting that Jekyll and Hyde are more entwined than Utterson suspects. In retrospect, Stevenson had left a hint to Hyde's true nature and Jekyll's inward battle of his dual personalities. The theme of duality is further developed by the contrast between the pale face and the black eyes, with pale suggesting that Jekyll is afraid of Hyde, yet the blackness about his eyes reveals the guilt he may feel for the twisted pleasure he gets out of Hyde's freedom. Also, the use of the word pale and blackness in the same sentence may indicate Mr. Hyde is corrupting Dr. Jekyll. However, he is attempting to fight back, hence the word word pale, as pale people are often ascribed to be sick or ill. Stevenson may be indicated that evil is no more satisfying to Jekyll, and he is tired with having to battle with his dual side, which is Hyde. Hyde's presence often makes characters to go pale. Lanyon grew pale in reaction to seeing Mr. Jekyll's unconventional scientific experiments. This is shown by the quote, scientific balderdash. And he also died. He had his death warrant written legibly upon his face. The word pale can symbolize that Jekyll, the good side, is dead, and now Hyde has taken over Jekyll. Even the mention of Hyde is enough to change Jekyll. Perhaps it is Hyde trying to take control and come out. Certainly, the mention of Hyde's name stirs something in Jekyll, and he's battling against his duality. He's clearly unwilling to continue this conversation as it makes him uncomfortable. The words pale and blackness links to the Gothic genre and supernatural theme as Hyde is rising to the surface when summoned by Utterson's utterance of his name, like a demon or a spirit. Jekyll's threatening demeanor towards his closest friend shows that he would defend Hyde's existence against everyone, and that Hyde's violence is more pronounced in Jekyll's actions as well. The blackness may be a metaphorical symbol, as in black with anger, implying the boundaries between Jekyll and Hyde are becoming smaller. Jekyll is also following Utterson's stated practice, trying to avoid the subject of Hyde. Nevertheless, neither Utterson nor Jekyll can really ignore Edward Hyde. This can relate to Freud's I can't really say this word, but I'm going to try. Psychoanalytic theory, which outlines three elements of personality: the identity, the ego, and the superego that works together to form personality. Dr. Jekyll's ego is trying to meditate between his identity and superego in order for him not to reveal his evil side. Sincere and warm affection. There is a great contrast between the relationship of Jekyll and Utterson than that of Hyde and Utterson. When they meet at the corner of a street, Hyde is very cold with Utterson. He does look at him. Well, cold is not the right word. Let's say heartless. He's not really emotional, or he's not really friendly. Let's say, yeah. So Hyde is not really friendly with Utterson. He doesn't look at him and doesn't look to take the conversation any further in order to keep the secret going for as long as possible. This may suggest how Hyde feels threatened by Utterson, as he feels that um him talking to Utterson may reveal his true personality, true nature of actually being Jekyll. So there's a sense of concealment. So this is the theme, concealment. Also, later in the novella, we find Utterson looking for the intimacy between Jekyll and Hyde, when the letter put a better colour on the intimacy than he had looked for. This shows the reader that Utterson had to actively search to find his affection between Jekyll and Hyde as suspected, whereas Jekyll's affection for Utterson is seen by his looks. This indicates that Jekyll has to bury his connection with Hyde by perhaps putting on the facade or keeping it a secret. Both of these ties in with Victorian gentlemen and adds mystery and tension to the novella, bringing up one of the main and recurring themes of secrecy. So good looking, a large, well made, smooth faced man of 50 with something of a slight cast, perhaps but every mark of capacity and kindness. So there's a good looking contrast to Hyde. The quote stylish cast portrays Jekyll as deceptive. It's Jekyll who has the stylish cast, not Hyde, and therefore Jekyll is a composite of good and evil. Stevenson may be trying to indicate to the reader how all humans have a good and bad side to them, and may also suggest how Stevenson feels that intentionally trying to be evil in order to balance both of your good and evil side is delusional, because everyone already have an existing evil side to them. In 1871, Charles Darwin published The Descent of Man, in which he wrote his theory that all humanity shares a recent common ancestor with the great African apes. This theory led to the Victorians being scared because they believed that when they were evil, they were regressing and showing signs of a primitive nature. Also, the word caste suggests that while he may look like this on the outside, so he is has, sorry. So also the word cast suggests that while Hyde may look like this on the outside, something is hidden underneath that will be revealed later on in the novella. Furthermore, the quote well made symbolizes how Jekyll is handsome and is therefore a typical Victorian man, because Victorian makes where males were expected to be fit, strong, and good looking. Smooth face demonstrates how Jekyll's face is unmarked, which reflects Jekyll's reputation, which is unblemished at this point of the text. The physical description of Jekyll is in stark contrast to Hyde. He has now no less distinction for religion. Jekyll clings to religion and asks for forgiveness for his sins. This can signify how Jekyll has had such a traumatic experience of his scientific research that he now wants to become a follower of God. It's more a guilt that made him follow God, become more religious, because he wants to cleanse himself totally from the disreputable and wicked dual side of him, which is Hyde. His face seemed to open up and brighten. Stevenson presents here the idea of physiognomy, that Jekyll looks open and bright because he is supposedly all good, charitable, and pure. And also, how this isn't entirely correct. Jekyll has merely gained control of Hyde and his desires, evil, and temptations, not destroying them altogether. This also foreshadows the fact that this is merely temporary and ephemeral, as later he transforms once again into a gloomy and sick figure. However much you may struggle to repress your evil side, Hyde, you'll be inevitably tempted again, which desires fighting back much stronger than they were before. We see the dangers of repression here as well. Weeping like a woman or a lost soul. This simile, Paul compares his master to a woman, emphasizing on the idea that women were considered to be weak. This suggests how Jekyll was vulnerable and in great despair at the moment. This links to the quote, a dismal screech as of mere animal terror rang from the cabinet. Hyde is acting like an animal, showing his primitive nature. Pale, unshaken, and half fainting, and groping before him with his hands, like a man restored for death, there stood Henry Jekyll. Moral turpitude means depraved or wicked behavior or character. Jekyll uses Lanyon as his confessor, telling of the depraved and evil deeds he has committed as Hyde. Jekyll's tears of penitence shows he has some vestiges of moral compass, but the fact that he burdens Lanyon with the awful knowledge that a man, and indeed a doctor, one that is traditional, can carry out such inhumane deeds, albeit as his alter ego, shows how he is motivated by ego and his desire to parade his scientific achievements. Lanyon dies of horror and great despair. A brazen man had grown pale. The simile, like a man restored for death, symbolizes how Hyde's cause of death to Lanyon has backfired on Jekyll. Restored for death foreshadows Jekyll's Hyde, as his death is his fate and is therefore inevitable. I think I've done that already. On scientific balderdash would have estranged Damon and Pythias. Lanyon describes Jekyll's experiments as unscientific. Unscientific is an adjective and represents how Jekyll's experiments are unconventional, and balderdash is a noun which describes Jekyll's experiments as rubbish, nonsense by Lanyon. Lanyon is a representation of a traditional scientist, whereas Jekyll is a representation of an unorthodox scientist, which is basically unconventional. Stevens and why Jekyll's scientific experiments are unconventional is because his scientific experiments goes against the Victorian norms of scientific experiments, because his scientific experiments are not normal, they are abnormal to Victorian society and goes against their morals and standards. So Stevenson uses descriptions of Dr. Lanyon and Dr. Jekyll to show the duality of Victorian attitude to science. Dr. Lanyon runs a private practice, whereas Dr. Jekyll does his experiments in private in the dark. In the Victorian era, if he did secretive experiments, it was seen as unscientific. This because he was supposed to be more open and do experiments with other scientists. You weren't respected and your reputation would be tarnished if you did otherwise. Evidence for this is because Lanyon refers to Hyde's experiment as unscientific, body just and wrong. Lanyon also calls Jekyll as wild as harpies and evil. Harpies in Greek mythology is a creature which with a head of a woman and the body of a bird. This is a very unusual and unconventional morphism that contrasts how Jekyll is not a typical Victorian gentleman and the extreme extent to which Jekyll's experiments are conventional to Victorian society. Also, the harpies were mythical monsters in Greek mythology that were often agents of punishment. They abducted people and tortured them on their way to Hades' domain, employed by the go as instruments for the punishment of the guilty. Lanyon may be trying to demonstrate his belief that what Jekyll has done is highly shocking and he's trying to come to terms with what he has done as harpies are mythical birds, unreal. This contrasts the quote, "Oh God, I screamed," and "Oh God, this links the quote, "Oh God, I screamed," and "Oh God" again and again, for there before my eyes, pale and shaken and half fainting. Lanyon has no other way to react than to repeatedly invoke the name of God to save him from the terrible sight he has seen. He is deeply grieved and dismayed. Although also the fact that the harpies tortured and abducted people could reflect Lanyon's soul, as he has been deeply grieved and Jekyll has abducted, in other words, stolen his peace, pale, unshaken, and half fainting, and tortured him by making him grow extremely ill and die. My soul sickened at it. I must die. Lanyon is a traditional scientist, so therefore he's more respected. He's basically a typical Victorian gentleman and has a high status. This because he follows traditional Victorian experimental conventions. He does his experiments openly. Therefore, Lanyard's remarks about Dr. Jekyll shows Victorian attitudes to his unconventional experiments. This because it indicates that if you follow traditional scientific experiments such as Lanyard, a traditional physician, then you'll be highly respected and have a high status. However, if you don't follow the traditions and Victorian conventions such as Jekyll and do experiments in secret, which links Jekyll's attributes to Hyde, as Hyde is a homophone for the word hide, which has connotations of the words concealment and secretion. He will be regarded as evil and as wild as harpies. Basically, is because as wild as harpies is a myth, it's basically unreal. So basically, because you're going against a typical Victorian gentleman, you're like an outcast. You do not fit in with society. So this can also suggest how Jekyll is distanced from everybody else, and he lacks relationship with others. So Darwin's theory of evolution was rejected by Victorian society and even the original supporters because they had believed that humans evolving from animals was impossible since humans have a conscience, can, and a conscience is basically when you can tell the difference between right and wrong, and this is unlike animals. So in Greek historic writings, Damon and Pythias is a legend surrounding the Pythagorean ideal of friendship. Pythias is accused and charged of creating a plot against the tyrannical Dionysius the first of Syracuse. Pythias makes a request of Dionysius that he be allowed to settle his affairs on the condition that he leaves his friend Damon as a hostage. So if Pythias does not return, Damon will be executed. Eventually, Pythias returns to face execution to the amazement of Dionysius, who, because of a sincere trust and love of their friendship, then lets both Damon and Pythias go free. For example, Dr. Lanyon likens the early relationship between himself and Jekyll to that of Damon and Pythias. In example, sorry, not for example, sorry for the error, but Dr. Lanyon likens the early relationship between himself and Jekyll to that of Damon and Pythias, whose friendship was so strong that the former put up his life as a bell for the latter, sentenced to death by King Dionysius. The terms then connote self-sacrifice and altruism. If Lanyon says that Jekyll's darker medical research would have estranged Damon and Pythias, it indicates that Jekyll has done what Jekyll has done is enough to separate even the closest of friends. If I am the chief of sinners, I am the chief of sufferers also. I am the chief of sinners, I am the chief of sufferers also. Jekyll has realized what he has done and understands only he can deal with it. In his letter to Utterson, Jekyll has doomed his life with the creation of Hyde. Jekyll repeats, I am. I is a personal pronoun and indicates how Jekyll is taking all accountability for his actions, sin, leading to hell. Hell and Satan is religious imagery. Chief of sinners is Satan. Here Jekyll compares himself to the devil, who is the master of all evil. Satan is also the chief of sufferers because in the Bible, sinners are the evil ones, and after they die, they will go to hell, eternal pain and suffering. Chief of sinners could also indicate that what Jekyll is doing is one of the worst crimes of them all. However, I believe it can also be interpreted as the fact that Jekyll's being played almost a godlike figure with the notion of separating good and evil within him. Chief of Sufferers suggests that Jekyll conflicts with Hyde are causing him an immense deal of pain. Jekyll saying he is being punished for his sins. For in an example, Hyde is taking control and Jekyll is weakening. It could also show that Dr. Jekyll's mental health is deteriorating, and in the modern day perspective, we could associate him with being really depressed. So now we are moving on to the next character, which is Mr. Hyde. Black sneering coolness really like Satan. The word black is dark imagery associated with darkness, and darkness is generally a sign of evil. This Gothic genre theme. So furthermore, his sneering coolness suggests to the reader that he does not care about what he has done, which means that he's terrifying because he has no conscience. Satan is the prince of darkness and associated with evil. The adverb really emphasizes Hyde's direct nature and characterization of Satan, but similarly, really like Satan may suggest how Hyde has a strong connection to Satan. The adjective sneering suggests the pleasure and self gratification Hyde gets from the violent crimes he commits. Satan's signature. As a lead figure of hell and all sinners, Satan implies that Mr. Hyde is the embodiment of evil himself. By having his signature upon his face, it suggests that Satan has already signed him over to the dark side and sealed his fate as someone who was bound by malice and brutality. The Victorians believed in the pseudoscience of physiognomy, an example that a person's appearance reveals their inner self and moral character. So the belief was that the faces of criminals will show certain features associated with evil. A signature is something that is repeated like Hyde's evil acts. This could also refer to Hyde being Satan's property, being hence the signature. The signature could be branded onto him as he has done so many evil acts in the past and has resulted in the face having a a repeated signature. This links to Lombroso's theory. Lombroso believed that criminality was inherited and that criminals could be identified by physical defects that confirmed them as being atavistic or savage. The Victorians believed in the pseudoscience of physiognomy, an example that a person's experience reveals their inner self and moral character. So the belief was that the faces of criminals would show certain features associated with evil. There's little in the text to suggest that Hyde is Satan's property. A brief Google search for the term Satan's signature yielded a quote from an 1862 play by Henry Taylor. Don't say Google, sorry. Um, but Satan's signature yielded a, Satan's signature has connotations to an 1862 play by Henry Taylor, sorry, St. Clement's Eve. The phrase is lovely but not quite original, probably having its roots in the book of Revelations and the mark of the beast, which is 666. This may be the closest we get to a description of Mr. Hyde, a creature with Satan's signature upon his face. The belief that a person's character and moral standing was evident in the features of a face was common in the 19th century. It was expected that evil people or criminals would be ugly. The pseudoscience of physiognomy relied on reading the face to uncover characters. Lincoln Hyde's face to Satan shows how strongly Utterson feels about Mr. Hyde's appearance and how the poor evil appearance represents the devil's mark. The belief that a person's character or moral standing was evident in the features of the face was common in the 19th century. It was expected that evil people or criminals would be ugly. So what you can say is that in the book of Revelations, the mark of the beast is 666. So being that the mark is also the number of man. So basically, Given that the mark of the beast is the same as the number of man, PC may not PC, sorry, Stevenson may be trying to indicate how um just because just because men have the same number as the mark of the beast doesn't mean that we're permanently evil. Yes, humans have their evil side, but we also have a good side to us. So there's a balance in the good side and the evil side, and this should be normal. Stevenson alludes also to the 10th chapter in the novella here, as before Utterson meets Hyde, he is retold the story of a door when Hyde trampled a little girl and is ordered to pay compensation. Upon cashing in the compensation, it is noticed that the signature on the check, which is for £100, is that of Jekyll's. Stevenson's use of a signature often outlines ownership and responsibility, as here we see Hyde being described as being owned by that of a devil. However, when we see Hyde's possession of Jekyll's signature, it could hint that Jekyll is not controlling of Hyde, and links to Stevenson's warning that if the evil nature of man is let out, evil will always triumph over good. The sibilance of a metaphor emphasizes that the pure evil that Hyde admits. Utterson senses that this evil and describes Hyde as having Satan's signature on his face, showing that how it is obvious that Hyde is evil. Trample calmly over the child's body. Um, sorry. So as a lead oh no, sorry for that. The other snarled in a savage laugh. The verb snarled portrays Hyde to be animalistic, and subhuman as snarled connotes images of a violent animal. Stevenson could have done this to present Hyde as unpredictable, malevolent, and uncontrollable. Yet animals can also snarl when they are frightened, and this could potentially show Hyde to be frightened, as Utterson could be a threat to him and his real identity, meaning it is Hyde's natural reaction. The adjective savage shows how Hyde is a reckless, cruel person and laughs when he senses that Utterson is upset about angering Hyde. This shows the sudden change in demeanour that has occurred in Hyde as he was speaking politely enough to Utterson. This shows that volatility that being evil has brought to Hyde. The sibilance between snarled and savage almost makes the reader seem as if they are snarling if read aloud. This demonstrates Hyde's supernatural ability to force um, the evil nature of oneself to the front, further emphasizing the novel's motive of duality of man. Stamping with his foot like a madman, Mr. Hyde broke out of all bounds and clubbed him to the earth. Like a madman is a simile and emphasizes the fact that Hyde has broken out of all bounds. This suggests suppressed feelings. Hyde has withdrawn from violence and finally he finds a chance to an opportunity to unleash his violence and take it out on a vulnerable and helpless old man who cannot help himself. Before killing the old man, Hyde trampled over a child's body. Hyde's victims are those who are meek and are potent. In chapter 4, the epitome of evil and man's dark side is revealed when Dr. Jekyll's transformation into Hyde moves him into a person of what Enfield would describe as deformed and make himself violently kill Carew. This murder is unusually ferocious and brutal. There is a vivid imagery of being clubbed down to the earth and bones being able to audibly shatter. The true cruel and heinous nature of man's dual nature is revealed as a result of playing with the supernatural science. Stevenson shows the reader just what levels a man with a desire will go to achieve what he wants. The results are extraordinary, horrific, instilling an element of fear in the reader, making them contemplate what their due nature would make them do. Stevenson's intentions were to bring to light that man had two sides, that everyone had a deadlier, darker fact that they had under the usual self. The sheer brutality of his malicious assault is perfect for resembling how man's dual nature can be the epitome of evil, and that the reader should be worried and concerned, as the scene is horrific to reflect the Gothic genre of the novel, but should also understand that they had they have two sides, and not everything is a crystal reflect of a Gothic genre of a novel, but should also understand that they are sorry, but so let me just read this sentence again. The sheer brutality of this malicious assault is perfect for resembling how man's true nature can be the epitome of evil, and that the reader should be worried and concerned, as the scene is horrific to reflect the Gothic genre of a novel, but should also understand that they have two sides, and not everything is crystal clear about our physiological frame of mind as what we think. Stevenson here, with the violent nature of a murder, shows that man's dual nature has no limits to the destruction it can go, and that's the horrifying lengths it can reach to achieve what it wants, that the supernatural sciences themselves are beyond our comprehension. It also angers that the reader that Hyde is able to murder someone so coldly and heartlessly, and the reader begins to reveal their dual nature by getting angrier and having a desire to see Jekyll be put to justice. Here Stevenson shows in a rather subtle way that man's dual nature can be subconscious through the reader's intended reaction. Break out of all boundaries symbolizes no resentment to evil, no boundaries. Hyde has come out of all conventions unorthodox side. Hyde is profligate. Hyde has lost Jekyll, his good side. He is totally evil, and there is no good left in him. So there is no evil to suppress but to unleash. The readers in terror by Hyde being because they are scared he's going to go on a violent rampage killing others. Ape-like fury, he was trampling his victim underfoot and hailing down a storm of blows under which bones were audibly shattered. This is conveyed through the horror of this entire scene in which Mr. Hyde sadistically beats down Sir Danvers Carew. This idea and theme of evolution is implied through the use of a simile in ape-like. Ape-like can be interpreted in a plethora of ways, ranging from Hyde has immense strength and Hyde is ape-like not only in strength but also in structure as earlier implied by his troglodytic appearance. Stevenson was heavily interested in the theory of evolution promoted by the infamous scientist Charles Dickens, which was a relatively new discovery in 1859, which was called Origin of Species, which claimed that humans evolved from animals, and at the same time of it, and at the time of Victorian Victorians feared that when they did evil or wrong, they were regressing. The audience is therefore repulsed by Hyde's abnormal primitive nature. However, aside from the scientific point of view, Stevenson, being quite a retrospective person, looked at this from a social point of view. At this ferocious and merciless breakdown continues, the choices of Lexis in trampling reminds the reader about the incident in the story of a door, in which Mr. Hyde trampled an innocent young girl, which leads us to make the connection between the girl and the seemingly composed or elegant Sir Danvers. In Victorian times, the height of heinous crime was considered to be the harming of an innocent, a crime which has been committed not once but twice by the dastardly Hyde. An image of purity and youth was portrayed by the young girl from chapter 1, one which had quite nonchalantly destroyed. Secondly, the image of elegance and age portrayed Sir Danvers was also demolished in a similar fashion, albeit with a larger magnitude. This leads us to conclude that Hyde is unrelenting in his tendency to satiate his violent urges and does not care who he harms and of what standing they are. Hyde has lost all boundaries and is not willing to conform to Victorian conventions. He is unorthodox. The readers are therefore shocked and enraged by Hyde's unconventional behaviour. The key word in the adverb audibly reinforces that fact that Hyde's blows were of such catastrophic effect that Sir Danvers' frail bones, most probably because of age, were snapped so easily and powerfully that the stones were heard by the maid who was quite some distance away. The key word in the adverb audibly reinforces the fact that Hyde's blow were of such catastrophic icebergs were of such catastrophic effect that Sir Danvers' fell bones, most probably because of age, were snapped so easily and powerfully that the sounds were heard by the maid who was quite some distance away. Shattered implies that Sir Danvers' bones were like glass, and thus implies he was fragile. Consequently, because Hyde mercilessly beats him, the fact that he harmed emphasizes the fact that he harmed an innocent, only making himself seem so terrible and criminal. Listed. It was like some damn juggernaut. Hyde is shown as supernatural. Stevenson uses a simile that and the repetition of the word like to emphasize how abnormal and enigmatic Hyde is. The repetition can also suggest how those who see Hyde are terrified and so aghast that they are lost for words and find it hard to describe him because he is extremely peculiar. Therefore, the word like reflects how Hyde is very unusual and unfamiliar, that he is inexplicable. The word it emphasizes the extent to Hyde's aberrant nature. It separates Hyde from others and suggests that he is isolated due to the fact that he is different to others and defies Victorian society standards of normality. It dehumanizes Hyde and demonstrates how he is inferior to humans and animalistic. He is hideous. The repetition reflects the repeated nature of his immoral actions, violence. Victorians had a fear of animalistic instinct due to Charles Darwin's theory of evolution, which was published in 1859. The Victorian audience were really anxious of this. Also, the word it used the techniques of objectification. Stevenson might be trying to indicate to the audience by using the word it that character and has character and convey how he's emotionless and has a lack of conscience. Conscience differentiates between right and wrong, so therefore this indicates how Hyde rejects this and has no moral. The word it the word it suggests how Hyde is an outcast as he's not human, objectified, and echoes how he doesn't have a name. This therefore conveys the sense of secrecy or concealment, which is mystery. The, the presence this presents Hyde as as anonymous as no one knows his true identity. The word it contrasts the word like, since it mirrors how people are easily repulsed to Hyde and how he's indescribable since he's very unusual and unique but in a bad way. Furthermore, it represents how important religion was to the Victorian society because people were opposed to Hyde's evil nature. Queen Elizabeth I made England a Protestant country in 1559 by the law she passed called the Act of Uniformity. Most Victorians were really religious and believed in God, so a wicked man of sinful nature would have been very unusual to them, since God had a set of commandments and sin is displeasing to him. So therefore Victorian society would have been disgusted to by Hyde's character and sinful or malicious nature. The use of the word damned is religious imagery. The word is a biblical outline of Judgment Day. This quote infers that Hyde will be condemned to hell and therefore indicates that his evil, devilish, and cruel becomes hell. Hell in religion is a place because hell is a religion. Hell in religion is a place of eternal suffering for sinners, evildoers. Juggernaut creates an allusion to the Hindu 12th century statue of deity Jagannatha. Jagannath is the title of a deity Krishna. An image of a deity was drawn through the streets of Puri, Orissa, an enormous cart under the wheels of which devotees are said to have thrown themselves to be crushed, a sacrificial act of devotion. Juggernaut refers to some unstoppable force. The word Juggernaut suggests has destructive nature and his calculated psychological immorality, forceful power. This suggests his destructive nature and conveys his supernatural strength, supernatural power. This represents Hyde as intimidating and inhumane, as he's very different from others not humane and has higher powers. In Victorian times, people weren't very religious, so sometimes someone like Hyde would be very mysterious and won't be accepted as they only be only believe that God is the highest and powerful of all, above all other gods and nations, and Alpha and Omega, beginning and the end. Therefore, and therefore, overall has presented as supernatural and evil, or and immoral in the novella as he's referred to a juggernaut, and it. The views of Hyde's inability to describe Hyde's appearance contrasts how Hyde is pale and dwarfish. He is not a typical Victorian man. This is because typical Victorian men were tall and fit. However, Hyde lacks in the aspect of height since he is too short. The word ish means to some extent. This indicates how people who see Hyde aren't fully aware of how he looks, and that this could suggest how it's hard to look at Hyde for a long period of time, and people get glimpses of Hyde since he is very disturbing and traumatizing to look at. Pale and dwarfish. Hyde is seen as abnormal and presented as ill through the use of pale. This could link to the fact that the potion is making Jekyll sick, as Hyde is a bacteria weakening and killing him. Dwarfish shows that Hyde is maturely deformed and noticeably different. The word pale links with how people react to him. Jekyll goes pale when Utterson mentions Hyde, and Lanyon goes pale when he witnesses the transformation of Jekyll into Hyde. Stevenson maybe uses these adjectives intentionally because he knows that the readers who know about physiognomy would relate. Hyde with his Victorian belief that his physical appearance, which is deformed and short statures and of English population, statured could and short statured could identify him as a born criminal, like a rat linked to the Great Plague, which took place in 1665 and 1666 and killed a third of English population. This plague was caused by infected rats. He passed on their infection to their unfortunate human victims, causing them to become really ill and in most cases to eventually die. Hyde is noticeably different. He is deformed. The Victorian era was fascinated by durability, deformation, and grotesque things. They relied on religion, a religion did not offer me any solution or explanation for a disability, meaning the Victorians were forced with it. The non-normative were concerned about almost non-human. This could also link with Lombroso's theory that physical defects were a sign of criminality. Victorians believed in physiognomy. A person's physical appearance reflected his personality, whether the person was evil or good. Hyde being described as palish would would have caused the Victorian readers to dislike him, as the Victorian society were predominantly Catholic. Additionally, deformity is linked with the description of monsters, which are a convention such trope of Gothic literature. It is actually his soul that is deformed. It is composed purely of evil. This is supposed to defy the theory of physiognomy. Like Enfield, Utterson can't put his finger on why on why Hyde makes him so uneasy, because there's nothing particularly like Enfield. Utterson can't put his finger on why Hyde makes him so uneasy. However, they, however, Utterson was wise about him. Stevenson implying how wickedness is not shown by your looks but can be your concealed identity. So wickedness becomes a spiritual matter. He was small and very plainly dressed. Hyde may be trying to camouflage himself as he's plainly dressed and not wearing extravagant clothing, which would be a symbol of his high status in society. Instead, which Instead, he calls on the London streets in plain attire to blend into the surroundings. Uh, this relates to a later line which describes him as missing, which may apply that in fact Hyde has the animalistic qualities of a snake. When moving, he may be slithering in the dark like a snake. He may also be as slippery as a snake, wanting to get out of situations he doesn't like easily, such as talking to Utterson in this chapter. So now we are going to be reviewing Utterson. If he be Mr. Hyde, I shall be Mr. Seek. So this is the theme of um, concealment. So Mr. Utterson is aware of the story told by Enfield in chapter 1 about how a mysterious man and Mr. Hyde ran over a child one night. He trampled over the child's body and then said, as nonchalantly as ever, that the world would pay the family with money. This he does using checks that belong to Dr. Jekyll. Jekyll basically leaves his entire fortune to Mr. Hyde in the event of his death. Dr. Jekyll is a man well respected for his attainments in medicine. However, Mr. Utterson finds both vulgar and improper that Dr. Jekyll would have these annotations towards this strange man had. He finds it especially odd that Dr. Jekyll includes in his documents possibilities to his own potential disappearance, starting how in the event of this happening, Mr. Hyde should benefit entirely from all of Jekyll's possessions. This is what originates the pun. If it be Mr. Hyde, a homophone of Hyde or keep secret, then I, Utterson, shall be Mr. Seek. This shows that Utterson is more than willing to uncover the real secret of what is going on between Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde, which shows him as having light affections like Ivy because he's very caring for his friends and it's actually um he thinks for them and he wants to make sure if everything's alright with them and safe. So this shows that Stevenson uses the poem Mr. Hyde Mr. Seek, to show Utterson's curious nature in discovering the truth about Mr. Hyde. Utterson cares about his friend Dr. Jekyll. This contrasts the quote, his affections like Ivy, as this links to the quote, his affections like Ivy, as his emotions are strong, encompassing, and enduring, just like the nature of Ivy, as his emotions are strong and Ivy's. Utterson is very considerate and affectionate, and therefore he becomes really worried about for his friend Jekyll and wants to get to the bottom of what is happening. Mere darkness and besieged by questions. Stevenson illustrates a night where Utterson's own curiosity affects him as he states the role which no others were able to do as the only investigator into Hyde, unlike Enfield's rule. Queer Street, he faces his own demons where he worries about safety and friendship rather than reputation and a clear mind. The setting is described first as how he feels within the world, alone and the darkness representing all the evil he may have chanced on. This represents his lack of progress on his own, as toiling in darkness without anything to go on doesn't affect the situation. Darkness therefore infers he must see someone else, that there's an evil at play. Therefore infers he must see someone else, that there is an evil at play, and therefore foreshadows a lack of information is better than what he will learn. Besiege illustrates the lack of control as his identification, sorry, not ID, don't use abbreviations like EG, ID, and all that, and slash, you have to actually spell it out for English, literature, and language, and yeah, any English maybe you do, you have to do that. So, an distinct fear for his friend. This metaphor represents his breaking of character and will, yet his strength, and will yet his strength to continue. Unlike society suggests, the speed and power of his thoughts is also highlighted, symbolizing to the need for sacrifice of his mind, sanity, and time. The last reputable acquaintance and the last good influence in the lives of downgoing men. Last reputable implies that Utterson is the last respectful person involved with criminals. He doesn't engage in criminality but spends a lot of time with criminals and is respected by society. Lawyers were often depicted as greedy men who were alcoholics, and this was shown in one of the famous um, comic newspapers at the time in the Victorian era. I'm going to leave you guys to do your own research to on this context to see what is the name of the newspaper that made these comics that portrayed lawyers as greedy, um, cheats, and other unrepeatable things, disreputable things. So this phrase alludes to Utterson's relationship with Jekyll while foreshadowing the later events on the novel. As Jekyll loses his reputation and is influenced by evil and reprehensible characters, Stevenson hints towards the misfortunes that would recur throughout the novel, plaguing Jekyll near the chronological end of the world. Utterson is described as a friend to even the most troubled of people. He is after all the one that investigates Dr. Jekyll because he is so concerned about him and the relationship with Mr. Hyde. The repetition of the word last signifies Utterson's involvement in criminals' lives and may portray Utterson as dedicated to helping criminals to the audience. Downgoing men has religious connotations and refers to men who go to hell. This could symbolize how Utterson has no positive impact on these men's lives as they are on the path of death and destruction. The reader may infer that Utterson is also positive, but only accommodating. The fact that Utterson spends time with criminals, however, it infers, it infers that if infers by the and is inferred by the word acquaintance. This may indicate how Utterson may feel sympathy for these hellgoers and really care for them. Mr. Utterson, the lawyer, was a man of a rugged countenance that was never lighted by a smile, cold, scanty, and embarrassed. The first word in this chapter is the name of Mr. Utterson. It is vital to understand the origins of his name, as the name has been specifically chosen to support the story's plot. The name Utterson originates from the word utter, which means crying out. Utterson is a lawyer. This implies that he is high in status in his respective position and that he is a man of knowledge. Although the author Stevenson describes Utterson as a man who had a rough apprentice appearance and has a lot of negative connotations, we are bound to that Utterson's, Utterson is believable. He is the narrator of the story, therefore we will believe in as an audience that whatever he says is correct. In Utterson's case, this seems to be exactly what he does. He becomes a storyteller who shares the details of what he learns up until the conclusions of the story, adding to the novella's suspense. He is a lawyer who is presented as an ethical professional, an intelligent, trustworthy, and credible witness to the events he shares from this strange take. So even if utter does not fit with to cry out, Utterson's name may still be very important. This ties into why Utterson would be chosen as the story's narrator. If utter means to speak, articulate, or in other words to express oneself, this is exactly what Utterson does. He becomes the credible voice of reason who collects the confusing and misleading bits of information that surrounds the bond between Jekyll and Hyde in an effort to solve the mystery in the tale. We might find, I won't say tell, I'll just say mystery in the, um, let's say, mystery with the evidence that was discovered and suspicions that aroused on Hyde's true identity and Hyde's relationship with Jekyll. So even if utter does not fit with to cry out, Utterson's name may still be very important because this ties into why Utterson will be chosen as the story's narrator. If Utter means to speak, articulate, or in other words to express oneself, this is exactly what Utterson does. Okay, I already wrote this. I already said this. Sorry for repeating myself. So we might find irony in the fact that a lawyer is often in possession of secrets by clients which he cannot share. However, in this case, Utterson is a lawyer with little information who must gather as much as possible in order for it to make sense to the other characters, but especially to the reader, instead of defending a client he has become the investigator of. By the end, by the end of the story, Utterson is the one who Stevenson has chosen to utter or articulate the sentiments. I'm sorry, what was that again? Yeah, so Stevenson has chosen to utter or articulate the events of a story, so we finally understand that Jekyll Hyde are the same person as that this had been accomplished by Jekyll's experiments. Stevenson may have specifically chosen the name Utterson to reflect that this character would tell the story and answer the reader's questions by the story's end. Stevenson introduces Utterson as a somewhat boring and uninteresting character. He is an upstanding Victorian gentleman who avoids gossip and is an incredibly loyal friend. He believes in reason and common sense and never allows his imagination to run away with him. This lack of indulgence in vice, while portrayed as morally laudable, also seems to be linked to a lack of vitality, dusty, cold, and mortified. All furnish this link, a theme explored later which hides evil acts, adding to his energy and liveliness. His affections like Ivy. The simile like Ivy suggests that he's loyal and has old friends as Ivy grows thick and slowly. This could also indicate Linus' strong sense of maturity. Stevenson presents Mr. Utterson as strong, encompassing, and attaching takes over in drawing. This is shown by the quote, his friendships like Ivy. This implies an affections like Ivy's, not a friendship, sorry. This implies enduring, stable, and an unbreakable relationship. Ivies are a symbol of stability and strength, which indicates Mr. Utterson's friendship unbreakable and unseparated. This is because ivies are hard to take off or break, and they really attach to each other, which also suggests security. Stevenson compares Utterson's friendship to natural imagery. This suggests that Utterson's friendships are genuine. There's an absence of superficial and organic, and it is the relationships are organic. He's very open. You see him for what he is and he doesn't hide. This suggests purity and selflessness to relationship. The relationship isn't corrupted or inhibited by materialistic, worldly possessions or human constructs. There are no contributions or constructs such as greed, money, etc. Nature is life-giving, so therefore this suggests sustenance. Stevenson uses the natural imagery of ivy as a comparison for Mr. Utterson to present how pure, selfless, and uncorrupted his friendships and relationships are. Stevenson compares Utterson's friendship using the simile ivy also to show how his friendships are close as ivies grow intertwined. This suggests bonding intimacy, which indicates togetherness. Ivy's force itself and grows on buildings and are cut off. This symbolizes loose ends and that Utterson stays away from people who are superficial. His good relationship grows on top of them. They're of higher caliber. Stevenson uses this to represent Utterson's humble character and personality. This shows how he's a respectable person and indicates his loving selfless. Therefore, this suggests he's trustworthy and contrasts his nature of authenticity and how he's genuine. The many titles attached to Dr. Jekyll's name indicates an